Vipul, request you to just give us a second so that I can also start sharing.
Yes, sir. A very good afternoon and namaskar to all the viewers. A very warm welcome. I am Vipul Baba from the High Commission of India, Windhoek. We are today marking the birth anniversary of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, popularly known as Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the Indian nation and one of the stalwarts of peaceful and non-violent struggle for civil rights and political change in the modern era. Born on 2nd October in 1869, Mahatma Gandhi was at the forefront of the Indian freedom struggle against British colonialism. He was a pioneer of the philosophy and strategy of non-violence and an inspiration for leaders all across the world. A lawyer by profession, he first used his most potent peaceful weapon, satyagraha, peaceful fight for truth, in the neighboring South Africa, and fought the discriminatory laws in place there at that point of time. October 2, Mahatma's birthday, is marked as United Nations International Day of Non-Violence. I am pleased to have with us the United Nations Development Programme Resident Representative in Namibia, Ms. Alka Bhatia, the Indian High Commissioner in Namibia, His Excellency Mr. Prashant Agrawal, and renowned Gandhian scholar, Professor Rajni Bakshi, who is joining us from India today. Gandhiji believed that the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. We would begin with screening of a short video of rendition of Gujarati devotional song Vaishnava Janato by famous Namibian singer Sally Boss Madam. Vaishnava Janato was Gandhiji's favorite bhajan and is a tribute to all those noble souls who feel the pain of others and help those in distress and in misery.
Tatiana Pole, Paradana Navazale, Atare, Vaishnav Janato, Tenre Kai Jay, Peter Parai Janare. Mohamaya, vyape nahi jane, through vairag jena man mare. Rama naam soon, chari lagi, sakat ratat tan mare. Vaishnav jan to, tere kai hai jai, pira parai jaan re. Wanalobine kapatara hitche kama kroda nivarya panindare se otenu darshan kareta kula ekote darya Vaishnav jan to tenre kai je Peter parai jan re.
I now request Ms. Alka Bhatia, UNDP resident representative in Namibia, to deliver her remarks on the occasion, please.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies, High Commissioner of India to Namibia, His Excellency Mr. Prashant Agarwal, the eminent Gandhian Peace Fellow, Professor Rajni Bakshi, joining us from India, officials of the High Commission in India in Windhoek, my colleagues who may be online from the UNDP Namibia office, other distinguished guests joining online, ladies and gentlemen, to deliver these remarks on behalf of the United Nations Development Program here in Namibia on this special webinar on the occasion of the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. This is also commemorated as the International Day of Non-Violence at the UN. And I would really like to thank the High Commissioner for inviting me to participate in this important event. The International Day of Nonviolence was declared by the General Assembly of the United Nations to be marked on 2nd October, the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi, who is our leader of Indian independence movement and the pioneer of the philosophy and strategy of nonviolence. The General Assembly Resolution number 271 of dated 15th of June 2007 established this commemoration as the International Day of Nonviolence to disseminate the message of nonviolence, including through education and public awareness. And this resolution reaffirms the universal relevance of the principles of nonviolence and the desire to secure a culture of peace, tolerance, understanding, and nonviolence, which are also enshrined as part of the UN Charter. Ladies and gentlemen, more than 72 years on, the spirit of the Mahatma lives on. The name of Mahatma Gandhi transcends the bounds of race, religion, and nation states and has emerged as the prophetic voice of the 21st century. His crusade for the downtrodden, his fight against inequality, and his championship of human rights, justice, and freedom from all forms of oppression are echoed in what the 193 nations of the world adopted as the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. His fight for the oppressed resonates strongly with the principle of leave no one behind and reaching the furthest behind first as the foundation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Gandhiji's advocacy and action around sanitation and campaigns around clean drinking water and hygiene have become a critical goal to be achieved amongst the 17 SDGs. And out of that, the specific one, SDG 6, is extremely crucial and important, for instance, in the context of Namibia, where we are all are now. Likewise, the issue of gender-based violence that the country is facing needs the Gandhian ideals and the way of working to overcome. A reactionary, a revolutionary, or a messiah, no matter how he is described, Mahatma Gandhi was the quintessential humanist and will remain as the foremost champion of non-violence or ahimsa. Gandhiji wrote, "Ahimsa and truth are so intertwined that it is practically impossible to disentangle and separate them. Ahimsa is the means and truth is an end." And for Gandhiji, the means was as significant as the end. Means justify the end or the goal, and hence the critical importance of ahimsa or non-violence to attain the ultimate truth. As we all know, Gandhiji led the way to the independence of India through principles of non-violence, peace, and truth. These values uphold the universalism of Gandhiji. Gandhiji's tryst with non-violence, and as was mentioned by the director of ceremonies, his tryst with non-violence and non-cooperation actually started in South Africa under the dark shadow of apartheid. He raised his voice against inequality and injustice, and even today he is acknowledged as a global icon of peace and non-violence. Many people pay lip service to the idea of peace and non-violence, and what distinguished Gandhiji was that he showed how non-violence could be successful in practice in providing an effective approach to the resolution of conflict. His principles stand on the absolute necessity for non-violence during India's freedom struggle, and its ultimate success moved many deeply. And non-violence has now become to be recognized as a powerful strategy for students, communities, disenfranchised groups, and whole societies in addressing and transforming their conditions. During the 20th century, 21st century, successful movements of Gandhiji in India and Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States led to the public's realization of completely new dimensions of non-violent conflict resolution. And in Africa as well, Nelson Mandela, or Madiba, as he is affectionately known as, was truly inspired by Gandhiji in the approach he adopted to reconciliation and forgiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, Mahatma Gandhi's enduring legacy of peace, tolerance, non-discrimination, and non-violence continue to inspire the work of the UN. At UNDP, we are calling on all for on this day to remember the non-violent activists everywhere in the world who have lost their lives in the pursuit of freedom, justice, and peace. It is regrettable that despite the COVID-19 global pandemic, violence in various parts of the world continues. Working together is therefore even more important than ever before. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude with the message of the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, on the occasion of this year's International Day of Nonviolence. And I quote, on this year's observance, we have a special duty: stop the fighting to focus on our common enemy, COVID-19. There is only one winner of conflict during a pandemic, and that is the virus itself. He goes on to say the pandemic threatens not only hard-won development and peace-building gains, but also risks exacerbating conflicts or fomenting a new one. Unquote. He has also called upon the people of the world to be inspired by the spirit of Gandhi and the enduring principles of the UN Charter. I would like to close with a quote from Mahatma Gandhi when he said, "We may never be strong enough to be entirely non-violent in thought, word, and deed, but we must keep non-violence as our goal and make strong progress towards it." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bhatia, for your remarks. I'll now call upon His Excellency Mr. Prashant Agrawal, the High Commissioner of India in Namibia, for his address on the occasion, please.
Thank you, Master of Ceremonies, my dear colleague, Mr. Vipul Baba. A very warm welcome to all the viewers and listeners who are joining us today from Namibia, from India, and elsewhere in the world on this very special occasion of 150th birth anniversary celebrations of Mahatma Gandhi, as also the UN International Day of Non-Violence. And for my Indian colleagues and compatriots, let us also remember that today is also the birthday of our tall leader, Lal Bahadur Shastri, our second Prime Minister. So let me pay a tribute to him as well. A very special thanks to Alka ji and to Rajni ji for joining us today. I think you bring in very valuable perspectives to this special celebration. Let me begin with some personal anecdote and personal memories of what Gandhiji meant to me. So there is this famous Mauritian filmmaker and writer, Mr. Alan Gordon Gentil, who about 15 years ago made a film on Gandhiji's Dandi March. And the film was titled Les Moussons Antines. It's a French title, which means the intimate monsoons. So I was a little puzzled by that title, and I asked him what exactly that meant. And then he told me that when you have monsoon rains, which is which gives life to the entire subcontinent, the welcoming rain which falls, it drenches your body. But Gandhiji, his philosophy, his values, and his entire life, it's like a welcoming rain which drenches your soul. So I was struck by, what deep meanings this title held. That the Gandhian values, they drench and rejuvenate one's, not just outer being, but one's soul. So for me personally, Gandhiji and all the Gandhian leaders, I would say, spiritual leaders, other leaders, Martin Luther King, Madiba Nelson Mandela, Dalai Lama, Bishop Desmond Tutu, and so many others. To me, they are like a moral aquifer. We reach out to them to replenish and recharge our souls. So it's a very special sort of experience to be able to understand and follow the Gandhian values. As Alkaji mentioned, that we are not very far from South Africa, and South Africa is where Gandhiji's transformation began, and he discovered this tool called Satyagraha, which to him was a moral equivalent of war, one should call that. And Madiba rightly, because of what Satyagraha meant, called Gandhiji as a sacred warrior. And very interestingly, when in Namibia last year, we were commemorating the 150th anniversary, and we had the honor to be joined by the father of Namibian nation, Tatekulu Sam Nujoma. And Tatekulu Nujoma fondly recalled how Gandhiji's own struggle against colonialism and apartheid also inspired Namibia's own struggle for independence and freedom. So it is like the values and the struggle not being relevant only for the subcontinent, but for the entire world. Uh, just to focus on two particular aspects, because time is short, I take note that both Namibia and India share a lot of similarities, vibrant democracies, which are also plural societies. And for plural societies, the Gandhiji's message of tolerance and harmonious coexistence was very important. And he used to say that cultivation of tolerance for other faiths will impart to us a true understanding of our own. And I think that is very relevant to us in today's strife-torn world and times. The other aspect I would like to focus on was what Alkaji mentioned, which is a very deep respect and regard for nature and environment. And I think what Alkaji referred to as UN and member states' adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, in a way, is embodiment of that deep spirit of mankind learning to live as part of the nature and not treat it as our enemy. And I think the COVID pandemic has really shown us the urgency to adopt those values and those methods to our lives. Uh, in fact, today morning we were at the Emmanuel Shifidi School in Gadatura, where 150 young students learned how to plant seeds and grow trees and so on. So I think we are igniting young minds in that sense. Uh, Let me conclude by saying that the Gandhian way is a real option. It's a live option, an option that informs and illuminates. And I sincerely hope that our viewers, our listeners, all of us can be inspired by the Gandhian values as we commemorate this very special occasion. So thank you once again to everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your address. As part of the Gandhi at 150 celebrations and spreading the messages of Mahatma Gandhi in Namibia, High Commission of India has been organizing several activities in the past 2 years, including the 150th birth anniversary celebrated last year, as was mentioned by the High Commissioner. We saw the presence of His Excellency Dr. Sam Nujoma, the father of Namibian nation, Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, Honorable Speaker of National Assembly, among other Namibian dignitaries. We bring to you glimpses of these activities compiled together in form of a video by Dr. Nikhila Hiremat from the High Commission of India. We have the honor of having renowned Gandhian scholar, Professor Rajni Bakshi with us today. Professor Bakshi is a writer, a speaker, member executive committee of Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Smriti, and former Gandhi Peace Fellow at Gateway House. She also serves on the boards of Child Rights and You and Citizens for Peace. I now request and invite Professor Rajni Bakshi to enlighten us all with her thoughts on the topic, Civilization and Non-Violence, Creative Possibilities. And to all the viewers who are watching us live on Facebook right now, we welcome your questions, your comments, your views on this talk. You can mention them in the comment section of the Facebook live post so that we can put them up to Professor Bakshi after her talk. Professor Bakshi, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bawa. It is truly an honor to be with all of you. His Excellency, High Commissioner of India in Namibia, Shri Prashant Agarwal, the resident representative of the UNDP in Namibia, Ms. Alka Bhatia, and all the friends and colleagues, both at UNDP, at our embassy, and friends in Namibia. I feel very, very honored to speak on this platform, and I thank you for giving me this opportunity. Before we proceed with the topic, also because Ms. Bhatia mentioned this topic, I would like to begin with a moment of silence, just a few moments of silence, to mourn the escalating problem of gender violence. So I would just ask you to share with me a few moments in silence to pray for the healing and justice for all the victims of gender violence across the world. When we hear about unspeakable acts of violence of any kind, but particularly against women and children, it's very easy to despair and feel that are we perhaps a species that is incapable of being civilized? And it's very natural for people to ask, what hope is there for nonviolence in a world where such heinous crimes are committed, and no matter how much we try to address the problem, at the moment at least, it seems to be getting worse. So today, I would request you to join me in considering a rather tantalizing question, which is, for a moment, it may seem counterintuitive. What if civilization itself is a creative possibility created by nonviolence? That civilization itself is the possibility that was created by nonviolence. Now, to explore this, we will, and it's interesting because this talk is being hosted from Namibia, and we all know that Africa is the cradle of our species, where our species took shape. So I ask you to join me in imagining, in visualizing a time very, very far back in the past when our ancestors, the early humans, were still roaming in herds rather than having yet formed communities. And then a time came when, even in this herd state, some of our ancestors began to stop for the ones who fell. I'll explain this by what I mean by sharing what the famous cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead said when she was asked what she would consider to be the first sign of civilization. Margaret Mead did not refer in her answer to clay pots or the wheel or learning how to make fire or even stone chisels, which we know we have found evidence of stone chisels that are tens of thousands of years old. For Margaret Mead, the first evidence of civilization was a fractured femur found in an archaeological site of a prehistoric human settlement. The femur is the bone that links the hip to the knee. It's perhaps the most important bone in the body. And even without modern medicine, it takes many, many weeks of rest, complete rest, for that fractured femur to heal. So what that ancient broken and healed femur showed Margaret Mead was that someone, or many someones, had provided the care and the nourishment that enabled that person, the owner of that broken femur, to get complete rest and recover. For Mahatma Gandhi, this capacity for nurturing and kindness was the essence of human beings. And I feel that maybe this is why he repeatedly said that nonviolence is as old as the hills. And this may also be why for Gandhiji, civilization and nonviolence were almost synonymous. Now, this again may seem very counterintuitive because we have been taught to think of civilization as pyramids, as fancy technology, or very intricate artworks and many other things, which often we know involved a great deal of violence, including slave labor. So this claim that I'm making about civilization and nonviolence perhaps being synonymous needs to be investigated. So first we need to understand that where Gandhiji is coming from and how remarkable his insight was. See, at the time of Gandhiji, so that's basically the first half of the 20th century, the dominant theory about human evolution was broadly or loosely called the killer ape theory. And this was the assumption that our ancestors, I mean, this was argued by several scientists. It was at that time the popular scientific idea that it was the interpersonal aggression of which our branch, the branch of apes from which we are descended, that it was their capacity for violence, their aggressive characteristics, which ensured that our branch, developed as it did, and here we are, sapiens sapiens. And therefore it was argued that that violent instinct is a fundamental element of human psychology. Not only that is what makes humans more dynamic. Furthermore, it was argued that because you had to explain then why all the religions of the world in some form or the other urge human beings that thou shalt not kill. So this was explained away as a kind of moral superimposition, that our actual natural tendency is to be violent, and that is why all the moralists and the religious teachers have been telling us not to be violent or to be kind, and we have to learn to do this. So, and therefore basic implication being that violence is natural and non-violence is somehow unnatural. Now, I'm happy to report to you that Gandhiji's instinct and his basic faith has been validated manifold by many kinds of research in both the social sciences. I mean, I regard anthropology as a social science, and the other material sciences, particularly our advancing knowledge based on DNA and neurosciences, etc. And I will quote to you here from Frans de Waal, who was a Dutch primatologist. He says, and I quote, "We know a great deal about the causes of hostile behavior in both animals and humans, ranging from hormones and brain activity to cultural influences. Yet we know little of the ways conflicts are avoided, or how, when they do occur, relationships are afterwards repaired and normalized. As a result, people tend to believe that violence is more integral to human nature than peace." Another evidence that I would share with you has come from people who have been in the profession of training people to learn violence. So there is a famous book called On Killing, The Psychological Cost of Learning to Kill in War and Society. It's written by an American soldier, a former army man, sorry, Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman. And he writes in this book, there can be no doubt that this resisting to killing, that this resistance to killing one's fellow man is there, and that it exists as a result of a powerful combination of instinctive, rational, environmental, hereditary, cultural, and social factors. It is there, it is strong, and it gives us cause to believe that there just may be hope for mankind after all. So here is a military man who is writing about the experience of how difficult it is to train people to kill. Therefore, I mean, all this was building up through the 50s and 60s and 70s. And in 1986, UNESCO convened an international meeting of scientists. I think actually it was a long process, but because the final meeting of this group happened in Seville, this is what I'm about to tell you about is known as the Seville Statement on the Nature of Violence in Human Society. And these, they were both natural and social scientists who were brought together by UNESCO. And they came to 4 conclusions. And that's what the Seville Statement consists of. War or any other violent behavior is not genetically programmed into human nature. In the course of human nature, there has not been a selection for aggressive behavior more than for other kinds of behavior. Humans do not have a violent brain, and war is not caused by instinct. Instead, they said, this group of scientists, just as war begins in the minds of men, peace also begins in the minds. The same species who invented war is capable of inventing peace. Now, you may say that this is all well and good, but how do we cope with the reality of everyday life? And that's why I began by acknowledging and mourning the violence that we are confronted with in everyday life, which actually is not about power in the larger sense. But it's because when we think of wars, it is about power struggles between nations, between cultures. But it is about power in a very insidious way at the everyday ordinary person, at the level of the ordinary person in everyday life. Now, even in these conditions, it's important to acknowledge that there have been some amazingly successful experiments where people have worked with psychologists and people who are trained in these arts, and they really are an art more than a science, I think. I mean, though their basis is science, who have managed to help people with violent tendencies to overcome them. And they have done this very largely by enabling the perpetrators to firstly de-brutalize whatever there is in their past, because there's a whole lot of research which is showing that the people who commit unspeakable acts of violence are more than ever likely to have been victims themselves at some earlier stage. I'll give you an example. I visited Colombia some years back, and I was taken by the local mayor's office. They very kindly organized a tour to a child care center, which was part of a large program that the Colombian government had launched called the Good Start program. This program allows young mothers who may be working mothers, or they may be single mothers. They have no one to leave their infant with when they go away to work. They can leave the child there. Now, why was this program started? Because research showed that if the human infant is even left unattended, meaning that if the, and I mean really infant, you know, that child who cannot even roll off the bed, if it is left unattended, you know, lying there without having its diaper changed, no human touch, and it cries and nobody comes in response, that this too begins to hardwire the brain in ways that makes that person as a grown up more likely to be violent. So this is the level at which it, you know, our knowledge on this issue has grown. Of course, that if you beat a child, that leads to violence. I think this is a very well-known thing. So because Colombia had such a huge problem of, and this actually, the story I'm telling you is from the town of Medellin, which, as you know, at one time was almost in a state of civil war because of criminal gangs and drugs, etc. So they launched this program so that more children will grow up, with a healthy mind and a healthy psychological base, and therefore be either completely invulnerable or less vulnerable to the forces that turn them towards violence or to violent responses to whatever situations they face in life. Now, that is one side of the story. But what about the rest of us who are fortunate? I mean, what about those people who are fortunate to have a normal childhood? Nobody has beaten them, etc. But still, even such people who have no experience of themselves in childhood being beaten may have a tendency to erupt in a violent form if they are attacked or if they are provoked. This too we have learned, again through experience and very intensive documentation, that you can train yourself to respond non-violently. But there is a catch. And I quote here from Thich Nhat Hanh, the famous Vietnamese Buddhist monk and peace activist. He writes, if you wait until the time of crisis, it will be too late. Even if you know that non-violence is better than violence, if your understanding is only intellectual and not in your whole being, you will not act non-violently. The fear and the anger will prevent you. So, where does this leave us in terms of our basically, I think the struggle is that we are trying to, you know, counter a kind of cynicism about nonviolence. I'll be honest with you. That's a lot of the time I find that's what I'm doing, because even among people who have no lure for violence, I'm not going down that track at all, you know, for people who defend violence, but I'm saying even those people who have a longing for non-violence, they feel skeptical. They look around them, they see what is happening, and they think, oh, how can we do it? So here is my kind of final word on it, in a sense, because I really want to leave scope for questions and answers. It's from Michael Nagler, who is a great American peace activist. He has actually recently released a documentary film, which I think expands on this basic insight of his. He's saying a non-violent response originates in the struggle to master emotional forces inside ourselves. And my guess, this is still Michael speaking, and my guess is that this very struggle is what feels so meaningful that it makes for he calls it the non-violent peak experience. And he says that this non-violent peak experience is addictive. So therefore, he argues, conflict is an opportunity, because negative emotions are an opportunity for conversion. And this, I would submit to you, is the crux of what the civilizational process is. It's not buildings, it's not technology, it's not even this magical medium through which we are all meeting today across thousands of miles. Civilization is this process, and it is necessarily an endless and ceaseless process. We have a term in Hindi which I really find is difficult or impossible to translate. It is nirantarta. Every moment we are called to explore this inside ourselves and with others around us. Now, of course, we will fail. Very often we will fail. But as long as we are willing to get up and not be defeated and, continue to resume this effort to explore and to live with our positive emotions, rather than be enslaved by what the Buddhists so beautifully call our afflictive emotions: fear, anger, hatred, jealousy, envy. All these the Buddhists call the afflictive emotions, for the simple reason that all the afflictive emotions make us feel unwell. And so I'll close by paying tribute to the entire continent of Africa for coming up with this most beautiful term, Ubuntu, which I've been told translates as "you are, therefore I am." Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Bakshi. It was such a delight to listen to these insightful views of yours. I wished you could continue for more time, but we have been receiving some very good comments on Facebook. People are saying it was very educative, very insightful. But if I and the message that you mentioned, that the same human who invented war is capable of inventing peace and non-violence. It's a very hopeful message, and that you could also train yourself, you could train your mind for non-violence, and that gives a very, very good hope to humankind. If I could take the liberty of asking you the first question, it's a very short question. You talked about cynicism that exists about non-violence. People are skeptic about it. Professor Bakshi, what has been your observation of how this cynicism has changed, or has it increased, decreased in the past century? In the early 20th century, we saw two world wars. So your observation and comments on it, please.
Yes, the 20th century is said to have been perhaps the most violent century that our species has known, particularly in terms of the frequency and the scale, not to mention, of course, the invention of the atomic bomb. See, I feel that actually we are living in a time of a very bitter paradox, or depending on how you look at it, at a very promising paradox. On the one hand, we are confronted with the very real possibility of mass and sudden death. Because yes, the Cold War, in the sense that we knew it during the Cuban Missile Crisis or in the 60s, may be over. But if you only for a second contemplate the volume of nuclear weapons that are floating around the world, it's enough to make you feel in abject despair. So that is one side of the paradox. The other side of the paradox is that maybe because of this stark reality, there is more creativity than ever before. More young people. In a sense, what is Greta Thunberg? It's not just about climate change. It's not just about the impending ecological collapse. At the heart of it is this, longing for a non-violent material order in which we don't, we learn, in which we learn to pick the fruit from the tree rather than cutting off the tree itself and thinking that somehow magically it will regrow overnight. So that's on the environmental side. But on the people to people side, I know at the moment what I'm saying may seem counterintuitive, because hate is exploding on the internet, right? and hate is exploding on social media. I am still not so sure that that reflects the everyday reality of billions of people. And in fact, after seeing this film, The Social Dilemma, I'm more skeptical about these symptoms, which lead people to believe that, you know, we are being overrun. It's like a tsunami of hatred is passing over us. I'm more skeptical of that than of the possibilities for, and the very real signals that I see of young people's longing. I grant you, there is a certain amount of nihilism. Okay. I also see in young people, some young people, by the way, I say this because I get called to meet young people in different contexts. So it's not a very large sample, but I think it's a respectable sample that I'm on the basis of which I'm saying this. So there is a nihilism, which is where some people are saying, some young people are saying, oh, we are such a hopeless species. We deserve to be exterminated. But that's a tantrum. Even in fact, these kind of people who feel so passionate, they are the ones who are actually on the side doing some very creative and very passionately positive work.
Thank you, Professor Bakshi. We have a question on Facebook, but before that, I'll request if any of the panelists here would like to say something or ask something.
Thank you, Vipul. And with the moderator's permission, let me also quickly take this opportunity to ask Professor Bakshi a question. And of course, it is such a message of hope that non-violence is civilizational. It's perfectly natural to be non-violent. And I think that's a great takeaway from today's session. But Professor Bakshi, I was contemplating what you said when we were talking about gender-based violence. That, and you know, this whole thing about, you know, the need for the perpetrators of violence, which could be horrific, to debrutalize first. Now, you know, Gandhiji used to say that non-violence is a weapon of the strong; it's not a weapon of the weak. And at the same time, a common man and can also say that, you know, he was a saint, he was a strong man. Maybe I am not that strong. So how does a common man use non-violence in his or her day-to-day affairs is a question I'm curious to know about. Thank you.
Prashantji, you are right. It is indeed very, very difficult. And particularly since the dramatic evidence that we see very often, what makes it into the news is the examples when people's efforts in the face of brute force are, you know, people are overwhelmed by brute force. What we are, I think the incident that was on everybody's mind today is about abject brute force. And it makes us also recognize that, yes, while our species has all these capabilities, there's clearly such a thing as outright evil, where a human being or any living sentient being is caused pain to the point of being killed without any gain even for the perpetrator. You know, it's not like somebody being killed for a reason. It's a kind of abject sadism. Now, I'm afraid that in that moment, I really honestly don't know how even Gandhiji coped with it. Because the suffering that is caused by such heinous acts does give you like a pushback. It's like, you know, like guns recoil. It's a very interesting, I'm sorry that that's the first metaphor that came to my mind. It's that kind of recoil that we all experience. And yet if we stay with that, if we let that become our dominant response, then we are going from darkness to darkness. So the only way to come out of that darkness is to firstly be defiant. To be defiant of that brute force. That the brute force may win in that moment. The brute force may have had its way in that specific incident, but it cannot win in the medium to long run. That resolve has to be maintained at all costs, because what is the other option? But the difficult thing is, and this actually is what I find very, very frightening, and this is why Gandhiji is more than ever needed today, that a lot of people are responding to incidents of brute force by offering to bring their own brute force in response to that. Therefore, this kind of call for public executions, etc., without trial in some cases. And there I can only point, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is Gandhiji and Noakhali. I often think that a lesser human being would have completely, he would have a lesser human being would have psychologically collapsed. The kinds of horrors that he was, that were recounted to him as he went village to village, community to community. And in every single case, his appeal is to the perpetrators, that, or at least that those communities, whether it is the specific individual murderer, I don't know. He says, you must make amends. You must heal. So, because see, the one thing we know for sure, again, I'm again quoting from research, that there is mountains of evidence that the returning violence with violence, brute force with brute force, does not solve the brute force that started the problem. So that is the call we have to take. Do we want to come out of this cycle of heinous violence, or do we want to increase it? If first we have to make this choice, because if we don't make, this is the, it's like a decision tree. If we have not made the right choice at this point, then no matter how many tracks you go down, there will be no solution. At least on the track where we say, okay, we know that we want to overcome all the problems that arise out of letting brute force run amok, then a whole host of options opens up. And there are multiple dimensions on which, so many people are working. I know of a project in Rajasthan where somebody is working on an open prison and has like, it's not, from yesterday. She's been doing this for years. So we have to really hang on to the coattails of all these people who do this creative work, even if it's against terrible odds.
As Gandhiji also said, an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind.
Exactly.
And I think it was Gandhiji's resolve and his enormous self-control that he was called a Mahatma, a great soul. We have a question on Facebook, Professor Bakshi. As the civilization prospers with technological advancements and economic prosperity, does it necessarily lead to a decline in social values and ethics?
Well, if you're asking this question to Gandhiji or from Gandhiji's, records, then the answer is that if there is a decline happening, then in any case, it's not civilization. I just want to share with you what is usually considered a bit of a joke, but actually it's a very, very serious statement. And unfortunately, it has always been, or rather more often than not, misquoted. Gandhiji was asked, this happens in Britain. He's asked by a British journalist on one of his visits there, maybe for the roundtable meeting, that Mr. Gandhi, what do you think of Western civilization? But that's wrong. The question he was asked is, Mr. Gandhi, what do you think of modern civilization? And I know this, I can give you the reference later, but somebody who has seen the film clip has written this in a book. And Gandhi answers, it would be a good idea. meaning that what we are currently living through, and he's saying this in the 1930s, he's saying that the decline in moral and ethical standards is so severe that it doesn't deserve to be called a civilization. So if there is the only reason why we can still make some claim, to at least be aspirationally civilizational, let's put it that way, we are aspirationally civilizational, is because we do also live in the time when every single nation in the world is a signatory to something called the Human Rights Charter. That has never happened before in this kind of, it's a bigger achievement than we very often like to, acknowledge, because it's violated so often. But it exists. The standard has been set.
Of course. Thank you, Professor Bakshi. I mean, the viewers on Facebook also like the talk very much. They say it has been a very good learning experience for all of them as well.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I'll now request Dr. Nikhila Hiremat, teacher of Indian culture and yoga at the High Commission, to propose a formal vote of thanks, please.
I'm sorry to chip in, but before Nikhila ji proposes the vote of thanks, I see that Alka ji wanted to say something. So briefly, your comments.
I actually have a lot to say, but then mindful of the time, I was just saying, just very quickly, I just wanted to say, because it is, and it was also about the trappings of civilization that we have. I mean, I call it trappings because I think the moral character fiber, we've regressed rather than progress. So there is that disconnect that we are seeing, and a lot of it, I mean, at least within the UN, and you mentioned the human rights, etc. Yes, we are all standing for human rights, but eventually it comes back to the man or the woman itself, where you need to get that. And because when a child is born, I mean, if you just look at it, a child is not born as a violent human being,
No.
right? It is how the child is conditioned, brought up, the kind of environment and the lessons that, the examples that he sees. So
Yeah.
that is where I think, and we've, in a lot of our work in terms of gender-based violence and human rights and all the conflict resolutions, etc., there is a lot of focus on the behavior change aspect now.
Yeah.
But I don't know to what extent it's a mammoth task, and it has to be done at all levels, right from the grassroots up. Absolutely. And from the leadership down. You see how many countries are in conflict these days. Why? Until the conflict exists, there is no human development. And who is the worst sufferer? So it's really painful to see all this. And that's why when you were, actually when I was, when the High Commissioner asked me to speak about Gandhiji, so you, as an Indian as well, you know about Gandhiji and all. But then I said, no, let me kind of backtrack a bit, refresh the thing, and you so struck again, so his ideals really resonate. So I'm just thinking of ways how some of these great men should be again kind of, our history books would now be completely filled with all kinds of other stuff. It's the politics